Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Home Together series of virtual talks. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Mr. Tim Goodbody. Tim is a former Commodore of our club, and it's fair to say one of Ireland's most accomplished sailors. Tim's sailing resume speaks for itself, having successfully raced across multiple classes, including Dragons, J24s, and Sigma 33s. You also now find him skippering his J109 White Mischief. A notable highlight of Tim's sailing career was helming Tom Power's team on the Dubois 40 Irish Independent, which won the overall fastest race in 1987. The steep learning curve this experience provided stressed the importance of a committed crew and teamwork to Tim. This would prove pivotal to Tim's success over the years that followed. A quick glance at Tim's credentials will let you know what we have in store for you tonight. Former Commodore of the Royal Irish Yacht Club, as you know, former Commodore of the Royal Alfred Yacht Club, and a former chairman of the Volvo Organising Committee. Tim is also a very major driving force behind the development of the combined regatta with our neighbours, the other Dun Laoghaire yacht clubs. I could go on ad infinitum tonight about this man's experience and his contributions to sailing community, both on and off the water. But I think I'm going to hand that over to Tim now. Tim, I give you Tim Goodbody, and best of luck with the talk tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good to hear you. Many thanks indeed. Good evening, everyone. Sorry about the delay. I think a few technical issues and PowerPoint got lost somewhere. But whilst it says 60 years of sailing, a brief reflection, I'm really concentrating on the first 30 years. There are many aspects of this that, unless you were around sailing at that time, you probably don't know. But it all has to start somewhere. And for me, like everyone else, it was little boats, toy boats. I used to make them and float them down a stream. This one here is Timothy's, and Ari and I followed him around many beaches as he sailed this boat backwards and forwards. Some sail very well, some of course do not. And here, my eldest two grandchildren are wondering what went wrong. And they're probably still at this stage wondering what went wrong. As far as I know, it had a keel, but nevertheless, it was, like many small children, their start to sailing. I've just thrown the next slide in, as that is the site that we all like to see. And that's a fleet of about 55 Sigmas or yachts behind us with White Mischief in the lead. This was our first major regatta in Cork 2000, and we won 3 out of the first 4 races, and a couple of lessons got to be learned. Number one, we changed crew. There was nothing wrong with the crew that came in, but maybe they were not trimming the boat the way that I wanted or I was accustomed to, and maybe they weren't accustomed to me and I wasn't accustomed to them. The moral of this is don't change crew halfway through a regatta. The other thing that's very obvious about this photograph is the spinnaker is over trimmed, and the boat behind us by the name of White Tub, in actual fact, caught us very close to the mark. We had a late drop, bad rounding, and she got round inside us. But as she was over the line at the start, finishing first over the water, and our second, we of course got first. One of the other things we learned in this regatta, and actually cost us the regatta, was we picked up a large amount of weed on the last race. And I think there again, there's a moral to it, is always check for weed around your propeller or around your rudder. It was a pity because without that, we would have won Cork Week that year. But nevertheless, we finished 4th in our first major regatta. And like any class you go into, you've got to serve your apprenticeship. You've got to serve your apprenticeship. You can't expect to win first time off. But my sailing in Dublin Bay started in a mermaid with a gentleman by the name of Eustace Dockery. He was a great man, very generous, told me everything he knew. But whilst racing in the mermaid with him, my attention was drawn to the Dublin Bay 21-footers. There's now a mermaid, and there's the Dublin Bay 21-foot, beautiful yachts, foresail, jib, mainsail, and topsail. And in those days, the majority of boats had their own paid hand. And on a Thursday night or a Saturday, there'd be line astern on their moorings with the headsails and stops that's rolled up with rotten cotton holding them from unfurling, and the mainsails would be hoisted but scandalized by raising the topping lift so the yacht could not sail. And they were absolutely beautiful, beautiful, beautiful yachts. They had cotton sails, and we would never put new cotton sails up at the start of the season when there was an easterly wind with a bit of rain forecasted, as you would get black spots from the smog of England destroying the sail. But anyway, I was asked on board, and a great friend of mine, Don McMullen, got me a berth on Innisfallen, Maurice O'Connor's boat. And my job was a very interesting one. First of all, I was the junior crew, and my job was to pump the bilges, and anything above 10 or 12 knots, and they leaked like sieves. You could see daylight coming through the planks on the weather side. My wife has been very good. She's just topping my glass of wine up. Now, you could go a bit more if you wanted. So my function was to pump the bilges, as one can see daylight through the planks on the weather side. Every wave we hit resulted in water coming below through the numerous cracks and decks. The pump consisted of a hose with a plunger, and you pushed it down to get water over the top of the plunger, pulled it back up, and a quarter went up your sleeve, a quarter went into the bucket, and half went back down the bilge again, and you kept pumping. My other job and responsibility was to tail the main sheet that was fed through a little hole in the forward bulkhead of the cockpit around a T-cleat. And if you were pumping and someone wanted to adjust the main, then they'd shout at you, trip the main or release the sheet from the cleat. It was very interesting. Of course, I saw nothing of the racing at all. When it came to a spinnaker hoist, I'd pop up through the forward hatch, attach the pole to the mast, attach the pole to the sail, then to the mast, and when we jibed, the pole had to be passed back behind the mast and then back out the other side and reattached. It was interesting. Collisions were not infrequent. There would be a lot of shouting to warn you of it because it wasn't very pleasant down below. But in those days, there was a common belief that to win your protest, you need to go into the protest room with a piece of timber from your opponent's yacht and say, Mr. Chairman, that is my evidence. Of course, if you do that today, both boats will probably be disqualified. The yachts had no winches, so it was brute strength to get the sails in. And it were great, absolutely fabulous boats to race on, they really were. The skipper and owner was Maurice O'Connor. Maurice and Betty shared the boat, and they were absolutely fabulous couple. They really were very generous. I never heard a swear word on the boat. What we did hear the whole time was laughter. And they really were great, and they ran a very, very happy ship. And sadly, Maurice passed away, and I haven't seen Betty for a number of years. I'm not sure where she is or how she is, but Barry and Alan are both members of the club. So I've got a few photographs here of the 21-footers, and I think you all agree they are lovely boats.
Jesus.
Yeah,
I don't
in
know.
Dunleary Harbour. And that would be a host 17. Number 14 would be a host 17. See, the harbour's quite empty, quite pressed. I'm not sure if that is at 21. Number 2, not certain. Here they are again. And you can see the spinnaker with the very long pole. It hasn't actually been put out yet, but there was no way you could pass that between the mast and the forestay. So they'd no outboard engines, or no inboard engine, and no bracket for an outboard engine. So on the way back from Wicklow, you would have a plank of wood, you clamp the old Seagull to it, and all the crew would sit to lee to keep the propeller in the water. It was tedious. You could never really say with any certainty what time you would get home. But anyway, I think around 1963, 64, the owners decided the rig was really tearing the boats apart, and they decided to go for a smaller Bermudan rig, as is shown here. I, at that stage, felt that I wanted to do a little bit more than pump out the inside of a boat, and I wondered whether or not I had the funds to buy a Dragon, which I did. I think it cost me something like 200 Irish pounds, which for me at that stage was 6 months' salary. But nevertheless, I did get it. I'm just going to show you something that happened in 1966. The Vice Commodore referred to the combined regatta. Well, this is the first one that came to Dublin Bay. And the clubs, there was the Clontarf Yacht Club, the British Legion Sailing Club, the Royal Irish, the Royal St. George, the National, the Royal Dublin Bay Sailing Club, the Royal Alfred, and I think Howth Yacht Club were in it. I can't actually remember now. But it was really triggered by Peter Odlum, who arranged for the cruiser 8-meter class to come down and compete in Dublin Bay for the week with the cruiser 8s. Now, the Royal Irish Regatta was on a Wednesday because the grocers' shops were shut on a Wednesday, and we were referred to as the Grocers' Club. We were referred to as the tradesmen by members of the George. They viewed themselves slightly more aloof than we did. But nevertheless, we flew a blue ensign, which is senior to a red ensign. But anyway, that is the outside of that program. And then have a look at the course card. There were very few marks there. There was Sea Point, a harbour mark, and a few marks in Scotsman's Bay. Dragons, Glens would race out the Burfords, the Kish, the Bennett. And there was a lot of reaching and running in those days. And races were started irrespective of conditions, right? The onus as to whether or not you could race was left to the skipper. And that was good in many respects, because if you can't handle your yacht in 40 knots of wind at daylight with a fresh crew who had a good night's sleep and had good breakfast and had dry gear, what chance do you actually have when it comes to the same conditions that you might meet at night? But now there's an unusual, or not, a picture of the harbour that you may not see now. In fact, you will never see again. But that just shows all the yachts on their moorings and big spaces between them. The Wags were on moorings and the Mermaids were on them. Then there was a line of Dragons. There was a fairway. You can see between the Mermaids and the Dragons, that was a fairway. And races used to finish off the Royal Irish Yacht Club or Regatta, and more about that later. So at that stage as well, starts were in the harbour off the inside of the West Pier, and the first mark you rounded, of course, was either the West Pier or the East Pier, depending where you were going. And I had my dragon. It was Jean DK 109, which I bought from Shelter Douglas. And the fleet was a fantastic fleet. They really were great bunch of people. All sorts of people had nicknames. Frank Lamass, Sean's brother, was known as the Brain. Jim Mackin, who was a builder and built his own dragon, was known as Jim the Brick. Eddie Nichols, an undertaker, and Dermot O'Flynn, who was a surgeon, shared a yacht. There was a lot of chat about the relationship. But anyway, Dermot was called Dermot the Knife, Eddie Nichols, Eddie the Box. And then, of course, John Kidney, our revered past Commodore and trustee, was called Splinters Kidney. And I leave it to your imagination as to how he got that name. But anyway, that was it. And when you came back in to the harbour, anything could happen. I don't know why that yacht there's got its head so down, but you'd come in and be hit by these squalls, then race up towards the finishing line, which was on the inside of the West Pier towards the coal harbour, and there you finished. On regatta days, you'd round a buoy near Hell's Gates, which is near the marina, near the coal harbour entrance, and race down the fairway. And we'll get a little bit more of that later. I'm now showing you a picture of Peter Odlum, past Commodore of the Royal Alfred and past Commodore of the Irish, and probably the best sailor of his era. He had a number of cruiser 8 meters, and he won all before him. And he was an exceptionally talented and generous sailor in imparting his knowledge. The first time I raced with him was I got a phone call and an airline ticket was delivered, and I had to fly to Glasgow. Nothing was said, but I packed up my bag. In those days, we didn't have sailing bags, we just had a hold all. And I arrived in the Gairloch and was taken aboard, in Asmara. And Peter looked at me and he said very clearly, "Dear boy, I asked you to race with me, but not to stay on board. You will find a room in the club. Be on board at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." So that was a great start, but nevertheless, it was my first time racing with him. He was very, very, very talented and knew exactly where to go in the Clyde. And that held me in good stead when I raced there, the early 2000s. I was nearly a disaster, but nevertheless, I followed his device. Peter raced with me on my Dragon and taught me an immense amount, things that are still valid today. And I remember the first time that Peter had his own Dragon after a while that I beat him, and it was a long beat from Sea Point towards Eastmark, and it was tack for tack for tack. And when we finished, I was waiting for him to congratulate me, but nothing was said till he came into the changing room in the Irish. And he just announced to no one in particular, he said, "The pupil has learnt enough." And that was the last time he sailed with me. But any time I had an issue or a problem, Peter was there to give guidance and advice. He was really a great man. In actual fact, if my memory is correct, the chandeliers in the drawing room were presented by Peter. So it was lovely, very generous man. The Dragon fleet, as I mentioned, was absolutely a fabulous fleet. They established their own Dragon Cruise Union, and their motto was, if I can read it, willing when wanting. This arose after an occasion when the Dragons were finishing down the fairway off St. Michael's Wharf, which is more or less where the HSS terminal is now. And as each Dragon finished with spinnaker set, the crews jumped over the side and swam ashore, leaving their skippers on their own. And I understand that part of it was that the skippers, after racing, would gather together and buy themselves their own drink and leave the crew to buy theirs. Whether that's fact or fiction, I don't know. But nevertheless, this cruise union was was started and became a recognised union by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. And just a point, I actually have the charter in my office, and it should be in one of the clubs. It should really be hung up. It's quite a unique little document. It really is. In those days, if we wanted to go to away an event, we did not have Harvick trailers and four-wheel drives. We sailed the boats. If you want to go to Abersoch or Cork, out the harbour and turn right. If you want to go to Belfast or the Clyde, up to the Bailey and keep going. So this is the way we went to events, and this photograph was taken of Andromeda, Philip Wall Morris, on the way back from the Clyde, and it was a long trip back. We did it non-stop from Loch Ranza, which is the top of Arran, and there is Michael Jenkins, not feeling too happy with himself. We got pretty tired. We'd had to pull into Loch Ranza for shelter. We had no food, but Ninian Faulkner, Dr. Ninian Faulkner's Excalibur, was escorting us as mothership. And just off Donaghadee, not having had dinner the night before, breakfast that morning, or lunch, I think we had a packet of cream crackers between us, as Michael used to work in Jacobs. They shouted back to say, "We'll give you dinner underway." Now, I don't know what your view of dinner is, but to me, tea is one course, supper's two, and dinner is three. So we hung around the stern of the boat waiting for our food to be delivered, whilst they sat down below and had theirs. Eventually, it was passed back to each dragon in a bucket. And fried egg, bacon and sausage, covered in salt water and stone cold, is very appetizing when you're hungry. But that was a great meal, and we kept going. But that was the way we took dragons to events. Reggie Walsh, member of the George, took a dragon down to Torquay. That's a long trip, and he was stormbound behind the island of Lundy for a while. So that was once on the Dragon. I then had the opportunity of taking a 1/8 share on Arandora. And here's a Dublin Bay 24-footer. They're absolutely fabulous boats. They really are beautiful. And they were the boat that attracted the creme de la creme of sailing in Dublin Bay at that time. And we were all very envious of them. And we thought them very big. And of course, when the first one was brought back a few years ago, I suppose we're all amazed that our boats got bigger and the 24 had stayed the same. And here you can see them racing within the bay, and that is on the way down to Wicklow Regatta, and that might be Miles Stanistreet at the back there. I'm not certain. He used to come. That's Irene. I'm not sure who else was there. Can't think of the name there. I do know. But anyway, that was the last we saw of the 24s outside the Irish before they were shipped away. But the 24s, like other one design classes, were laid down by the Royal Alfred Yacht Club. And this is the specification that was drawn up by the Royal Alfred, giving the overall length, the waterline length, the beam, etc., and a general description of the boat. And this was sent to Milne in Scotland, and he was asked to quote. Now, it's very hard to read it. Sirs, with reference to the proposed new one design class for Dublin Bay, Lord Gleneevy has placed the corresponsibility to it before my committee. I'm instructed to say that my committee agrees to your terms as set out in your letter of 23rd of November, in which you agree to design and provide plans, specifications, blueprints, etc., for a racing yacht about 24 feet waterline, suitable for racing in Dublin Bay, for the sum of £30. Such plans to become the property of the Royal Alfred Yacht Club, and they're still the property of the Royal Alfred Yacht Club today. My committee have in mind a yacht something of the type of the West Solent W class and the somewhat similar dimensions, but of much faster type. Conditions in Dublin Bay can be fairly bad at times, and the extreme racer would seem to be out of the question. It seems to us that moderate V sections are indicated to obviate the excessive pounding in a head sea. So that was the letter that gave Arthur Milne the instructions to proceed with the design of the 24s. And they're a fantastic boat. Ninian Faulkner, Rory Hanlon took them to the Faroes and Iceland. I sailed them a few times to the Clyde and back again. Much more comfortable than Dragon, believe me. And we had great racing. I went up to the Clyde with Dykel Morris on Vandra, and we were the first boat in our class for Clyde Week. So that's just something that is there. And that is the blueprint of the 24. And I said one has been restored already, and I gather more are in the process of being restored as well. I suppose I come to the end of my time in a Dragon, and the in class was J24. And this was a fabulous little boat where when we bought it, over 1,000 had been built. Pure one design. Here we're racing in pool. One can actually see, I've got another photograph in my office, Mac was asked to go forward to do something, and he wasn't too happy about that. And that is Jerry Dowling behind. I share the boat with Peter Mullins and Jenny Gibbs. Peter sadly got cancer and for a variety of reasons emigrated, so Jenny and myself remained the two owners. And it really was a very happy partnership with Jenny. She would steer when she was happy steering, or I would steer when I was happy steering. Sometimes she would say to me, "Do I have room? Can I get in there to get around that mark?" And I'd say, "Yeah, have a go." And she would simply turn around and say, "Tim, yeah, you take it. You got me into this mess. You can get me out of it." But it really was a great time and a fantastic class. We raced the J in Isora races, not knowing that the boats capsize and sink. I wouldn't be too happy taking them offshore again. But anyway, we went to our first national championships in Kinsale, and I'd been away before then. The practice was to sail with a crew of 4, Hellman and 3, but the Americans were starting to sail 5 up with a crew weight as close to 400 kilos as they possibly could. I waited until 29 minutes past 5 when the entries closed at 5:30 to put my crew declaration in with 5 crew and all up weight just over 390 kilos. We won the event in very fresh conditions. Our main competitors were Anthony O'Leary, whose father Archie, and he was probably a good 22 stone, and Robert Dixon, his crew. So there we are. On the left is Peter Stapleton and Irene and Jerry. I must say the 2 guys seem to have aged an immense amount. I don't say the same of my wife, you know that. But anyway, well done. Jerry, of course, will be our incoming Commodore. So that was the J in Kinsale. Now, come to the Admiral's Cup in 1987. The Admiral's Cup was one of the most prestigious team racing events in the world at that point in time. It was a Nations Cup, 3 boats from each nation, and in 1987 there were 14 teams, usually 2 small boats, 1-tonner, 2 1-tonners, and 1 2-tonner. I came in about halfway through the trials, had a couple of weekends sailing in Christchurch Bay and the Solent, and then we had 10 inshore races in Howth, all windward Lords, and please say we came out first of those 10 races, so we qualified. The fact that we qualified didn't mean to say that all the crew on the boat were going to be selected. And Tom had a fair bit of convincing to do that I would not be a liability on the Fastnet or Channel race, as I had really never raced offshore before. But nevertheless, we were selected and were going to head to campaign practice in the south of England. About that time, one of the English yachts, a Dubois one-tonner by the name of Full Pelt, lost its rig in an offshore race and effectively was eliminated from the British Admiral's Cup team. Tom arranged a charter, and 5 of their crew and 5 of us were on board. And she was renamed Irish Independent, as independent newspapers were sponsoring her. As soon as I stepped aboard the boat, I knew this was a very different yacht to the one we had sailed before, which was called Mean Machine. Beautiful yacht, but somewhat heavy on the helm. Full Pelt, or Irish Indo, was beautifully light on the helm, good instruments, very well equipped, and some great guys that came to us from the Full Pelt crew. Joe Richard was an Olympic bronze medalist, Graham Deegan, a world Finn champion. Paul Stanbridge on the bow was the only man to run the bow of a 12-meter on his own. And I've never ever seen anyone run around the bow and do things so efficiently. And we also had on board Ed Dubois, the yacht designer. And it was interesting, in a race, if Ed Dubois looked into the instruments, see what we were doing, and Joe then turned in to have a look at the instruments as well, we knew they weren't happy with speed. So we learned very quickly, as soon as Joe started to look in, to call, come on, trim guys, somebody's got to do something. And we'd sit back, Graham Deegan and myself, and let someone come in, usually Killian Bush, to adjust the heads of trim. Well, it was a great team. We did most of our training in the Solent, which was flat water, and sadly not in Christchurch Bay. And the second race of the Admiral's Cup, when we got out into Christchurch Bay, the short, sharp, lumpy sea, wind over tide, were very difficult to sail through. They really were. But Joe Richards was very good. He'd give me the numbers to steer to and the angle, and we soon got everyone working very well as a team. The Admiral's Cup team, once it had the sailors ashore, had 3 boats. Turkish Delight, which is Mark Mansfield, Jameson Whiskey, which was Robert Dix, and Tom Parr with Irish Indo. There was a very powerful shore team. You recognize our past Commodore Terry Johnson and Sean Flood. And they had a team of about 30 people to look after us. Everything from accommodation to provisioning, the weather, sail repairs, rig repairs, and Richie was there as our boat person. I had to adjust my terminology on that one. I wasn't sure what I was saying. Boat person, boat boy. I certainly couldn't have said what they were called in those days. Nevertheless, the net effect of this was that those that sailed, all they had to do was sail the boat. They did not have to do anything other afterwards, not to worry about anything else afterwards. It was all done. This Admiral's Cup attracted a very high level of professional sailors, people who were ex-America's Cup, and those that went on to race America's Cup in the future. So it was quite daunting, and you know, I would naturally feel nervous before each race, and it's good, it gets the adrenaline flowing. The morning briefings were held on a mothership called Avanti, and we get weather forecasts from Bracknell in the UK and Met Éireann, and the Irish forecasts were in actual fact the most accurate. When it came down to racing, Joe would take the helm all the way out until about 8 minutes before the start, and then turn around to me and say, helm, this is where I want to start. It was never Tim, it was simply helm. So you knew what segment of the line that he wanted to be in, and then he left you to it. And that was it. He was a great tactician. He painted the picture the entire time of, when necessary, of the race, of the other yachts. And, you know, his call could be on port tack, there are a number of yachts coming across, you'll cross the first three, I'm not sure about the two outside. And as you cross them, he said, I leave it to you. Can you cross them? Yes or no? And I would look, and then he said, we're going to make the mark tack, lee bow them tack. And that was the sort of information that you wanted from your tactician. There was one, the first inshore race was quite a memorable one, in that we got to the weather mark first of the 1-tonners and 2-tonners with very light conditions, and full pelt was a very quick boat in the light airs. And Joe said to me, Tim, don't worry, there's a fleet of sailing one designs leaving this mark to port. They're on starboard tack. Now we will leave this mark to starboard. And I was on port tack. And I said, Joe, what in the name of God do I do? Just sail around them and don't hit them. So it just shows that you can have two different classes racing around the same mark on different tacks, and the rules of the road are those that hold. There was full pelt. That was Joe, that was the owner, Ed Dubois. Joe would watch the helm, and if I was struggling, he would call, wait to move either fore or aft behind me or ahead of me, as the case might be. It really was very good, and the whole crewing of the boat really was very, very good. This was the occasion when we approached the weather mark. We'd come in on port, cross the first three, and tacked under, ahead of this guy, underneath these guys here, and that fellow we actually lee bowed. But it was a call made by the tactician, and I did not have to look at anything or do anything other than sailing the boat. The same thing happens with the 109 with Richie. He will give me a very good readout of the tactical situation, and I don't have to take my eyes away or concentrate on anything other than sailing the boat. Sadly, I can't do the same for him, but that shows as well also how close the sailing was. Full Stranbridge on the bow, the kite might go out of the bag, the pole will be up, and from the moment our bow touched the mark, or was abreast the mark, the spinnaker was up and set in 8 seconds. That takes some doing on a mast that's over 50 feet high, but he really was quick. So that was the inshore racing. We then come to the fastest race. Obviously, it's a classic race. We had all been sent off, starts on a Saturday. We'd been sent off for an early night on the Friday night, and Irene and I went up to a lovely hotel in at the west end of the Isle of Wight. There we met Tom and Anne Roach. There we met Ed Dubois and his wife. So I don't think it was that early a night. Nevertheless, very enjoyable. The next morning, we were down for a briefing. And one of the points that came out of the briefing was, and I quote, no yacht has ever won the Fastnet by going inside the Portland race. Interesting observation. So anyway, we started off the squadron line. We'd a midline, very long starting line. We'd a midline start and were bow out. There was a photograph that clearly shows us bow out. There was the typical sag in a long line. A long beat up the Solent with a lot of traffic, and as we went out the Solent, we struck the Shingles bank. It was just like sort of a rattle on the keel for 30, 40 seconds, and then we were clear. We beat across Christchurch Bay and then decided that we could possibly go round inside the Portland Race before the tide turned. And it's a very narrow passage, and the wind was dying, and we tacked. The tide changed. We were about 2/3 the way round, and we literally hugged the rocks and came out the far side. Outside us was another Dubois one-tonner. It was an Australian boat. They're very original names. There was Swan Premium 1, Swan Premium 2. There's no prize money for guessing that the one outside us was Swan Premium 3. But that was the last we saw of her. She literally disappeared backwards with the new flood tide coming in. So that night was light, which there again suited Indo, and Sunday was a light, a beat all the way to Land's End. When we cleared Land's End, I think it was probably, I don't know, 7, 8 in the evening, we could see 2 yachts to lee and ahead of us, probably distance over the water, less than half a mile. We could recognize one as Jamarella, which was Laurie Smith and Rodney Patterson, the British team, and they were to weather, and slight to leer then was Propaganda, a New Zealand yacht. And they were vying for first and second place. So at that stage, we said, well, we're well up, and one will not tack till the other tacks. They're unlikely to cover us. And we'd got the 9 o'clock forecast saying that the wind was going to go into the south and free us. So we took a decision to tack, and when we went on to port tack, we were laying Council Point, just a bit inside Council Point, then the Saltees. Next morning, we'd 20 knots, 20, 25 knots, spinnaker up, damp, miserable day, and not a yacht in sight. It was a long old day, and we were getting hungry. So, the Decker system had us on course. There was a lot of chat, in actual fact, about packing it in Baltimore and going home by CIE. We'd all been to good restaurants in Baltimore. We were all dying for a pint, and that was a general consensus opinion. I doubt very much we would have gone in. It would have been pretty disgraceful if we had. Anyway, at about 5 to 6, we were abreast the Fastnet, and one of the crew's parents, Billy Pope's parents, were there, and they shouted, "Your first one-tonner." And we switched on the radio, and just shortly after 6:05 on the Irish News, it was announced that Irish Independent had rounded the Fastnet in first place, ahead of most of the big boats and first one-tonner. That's interesting. So we then settled down for a hard beat back up to the light outside the facilities. I think it's called the Bishop's Rock. Now, our light weight had helped us in the light weather, but we're now looking at 25 to 30 knots on the nose, and we were light with crew weight. So we were all on the deck again for another night, hiking as hard as we could. We got to the Bishop's Rock at about midday, and the 2 one-tonners, Jamarella and Propaganda, were on our tail, and we started to sail then towards Plymouth, spinnakers up, surfing in anything from mid-20s to late 20s in wind speed. And the 3 boats became overlapped. After 600 miles of racing, it just shows how close they were. And there were shouts of weather boat, keep clear, sail your course, etc. And protest flags were flown. We didn't think any more of them until we got into Plymouth. But anyway, they got ahead at some stage. We were changing helms probably every 5 to 8 minutes. We were just so tired at that point in time. If you missed a wave or didn't take it, you handed over to someone else. And we sent Joe Richards down to try and get half an hour's snooze. Without question, he was the best helm. and we needed him for the run into Plymouth. So we weren't too worried the other two had gone ahead, as Indo was the lowest handicap yacht, and they were giving us time. So we got into Plymouth at around about midnight or shortly before midnight, raining and about 20 knots of wind. It was starting to ease off. And there's Indo again at the rock. And we got in and we got some pints. Heineken, of course, had to be. And there's Tom, Joe Richards, and myself. At that stage, we knew that we had won the Admiral's Cup division of the fastest race, but not overall. So we disappeared up to the Mayflower Hotel, I think it's called, and had pint after pint after pint. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Tom took me by the elbow and took me outside onto the lawn and said, "Isn't that a great sight?" And I said, "What is it, Tom? It's foggy, I can't see anything." And he said, "Well," he said, "it's foggy and there's no wind and the tide is now ebbing and nobody can beat Irish Independent." So at that stage, it officially announced that Indo had won the fastest race. So you do need a bit of luck. There's no doubt about it. And I think the things that had gone in our favour was the light weather on the Sunday, also the fact we got around inside the Portland race, the early tack for the Irish coast, and the wind dying and the tide turning in Plymouth. And that's something you can't plan, that just happens. But I don't know. I've always said the definition of luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So that was the fastest race. Great fun. I wouldn't do it again. I think there are nicer places to go on your holidays. I'll just show you this now. Make sure I haven't lost pages. Something gone wrong. This just shows the Royal Alfred programme. And the people, Green McManus was a vice, Jeff Whelan, who died early in the winter, was rear, Selby's Commodore, Davy Crawford, treasurer, John Kidney, auditor. And Davy was always puzzled how John would manage to make sure we just broke even each year. Sean Dillon, great addition to the committee, Alan Corr, Norman Long, who died recently. Other people, Dick Lovegrove, Contore the George, and the Alfred later, Pierce O'Brien, Freddie Cooney, Martin Crotty, both of those have died, Tony Brown and Brown Mackle. But that was the Alfred in those days. And one of the things that we evolved was the Super League. The concept of a Super League was a large number of races. In those days we had 8, with 3 discards, 5 races counting. So in effect, someone could miss races but go away and come back and still be in contention to win the Super League. It became a very popular series. The issue was, to do it, we needed a sponsor. And Heineken were the sponsor. And I was very concerned that Gerald, who'd been Secretary of the Alfred for over 35 years, would say, "No, we don't want commercialism in yachting." So I'd lobbied the entire committee and then approached Gerald, who said, "Great." He said, "No, the number 1 cup we have, the most valuable one, was presented by the Dublin South East Railway Company in 1857 or 58. So that was Heineken coming in to sponsor the Super League, as sponsorship wasn't universally popular at that point in time. But it's something that is absolutely essential when you think of modern yacht racing. So anyway, it's interesting to note this year, if it hadn't been for COVID-19, Dublin Bay had accepted our proposal to run another Super League. And this was one with a twist. There would have been 6 early races with 2 discards, and then 4 final races. When you went to the final races, you didn't carry your points, you carried your place, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And the final 4 races in September, no discards. So there again, they would encourage people who'd been away, they might have done around Ireland, they might have been to Cowes Week, to come and participate in the end of season racing. I'm just going to take a sip of this now, as my throat's getting a little bit dry. So that was Gerald, and that really concludes my early 30 years. After the Admiral's Cup, the J24, I got a Sigma, and there again, the crew from the J24, Matt, Brendan, Davy Crawford, came on the Sigma, joined by other people, Patrick, Irene Sorahan, Dee, Trisha Judge, and then we sold the Sigma in 2015 and got the 109 in 2016, and merged with Richie's Dragon crew, and Rick and Rob Johnson came on, and we now have Johnny Skerritt and Ado and Stephen Breen, and we have Herman from Italy, and we had Ole from Germark. I say Germark because we were never sure whether he was from Germany or Denmark, but nevertheless, we have built a great team on this yacht. And from my point of view, Richie's a great partner. As you get older, you do get tired quicker, and it's good that he will take the helm in heavy conditions, or if I feel tired, give me a break. It's very good. It's a great family yacht as well. We've had grandchildren out. Irene comes out, Jilly comes out. When Timo's back from his sailing, he comes out as well. So it's a wonderful yacht, and I certainly, I think I'll be over-optimistic to say I look forward to another 60 years. I certainly look forward to another number of years. So that really leave you one more thought, and I think this is important, particularly after the time we have been through on the COVID-19. So thank you very much.
Well, Tim, I just have to say that was an amazing talk, and I feel absolutely refreshed, and I'm just wishing that we were out sailing again in Dublin Bay now. It's a terrible shame that we're not sailing this year so far. I'm sure we will get sailing at some stage during the year, but it's been an absolutely great journey. You presented your whole 60 years. I can't believe you're 60 years sailing. It's been fantastic to listen to your story. My special thanks are to Philip Duffy, Winifred McCourt and Tim Carpenter for setting it up and organising all these Zoom talks. They've been absolutely fantastic. And thank you all, everyone from the club, for tuning in and listening tonight. We had a great audience altogether, and I wish you all well. Have a great weekend. And that's it from me. Thanks very much again, Tim. You did great.
Well, thank you, Pat. That's right. In the time that's left, between now and we start sailing, that's the time for crew training.
I know it is, Tim. Preparation meets opportunity. That's what I remember
if your crew have a birthday present, if they want a birthday present, or if they want to give you one, get them to buy that. Brilliant. Yes, I read it every year. It's about my 3rd copy.
Excellent. It's on my my wish list.